Bring this meeting to order for the Growth Planning Steering Committee meeting of February 25th. We're running a little behind. Council took a little longer this morning, but apologies. So next is approval of agenda. Anything to add to the agenda? I don't believe so. Go ahead, Catherine.
Resolved that the agenda for the February 25th, 2025 meeting of the Growth Planning Steering Committee be approved as presented.
Mover and seconder, please. Noble and Ketchabah. All in favor? Motion carries. Moving down to the adoption of the minutes from the previous meeting of January 24th.
Resolved that the minutes of the meeting held on January 24th, 2025 be adopted.
Mover and seconder, please. Jaguar and Noble. All in favor? Motion carries. And any disclosure of pecuniary interest, the general nature thereof. Not seeing any. No delegations, so down to reports. Director of Planning Development, update growth forecast and land needs assessment for County Bell. Go ahead, Matt.
Thank you very much. Through the Warden to Committee, we have had an opportunity to update our growth forecast land needs assessment for the county. There was a number of factors which are driving the need to have this updated. A couple of the big ones are the change in the projections from the Ministry of Finance. There's the project across the road in relation to the possible expansion to that settlement area. And just the general nature of having more employment coming to the area will likely also lead to more population. So Hemson, the consulting firm Hemson, has done an update to their original growth projection numbers. With us today is Stefan from Hemson. He's got a presentation that he's going to be giving to the committee. So I'll turn it over to Stefan.
Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Mr. Warden and members of committee. I'm Stefan Cetrunovic, and I am associate partner at Hemson, and this retainer to update the forecasts follows a retainer to prepare sort of detailed long-term population, housing, and employment forecasts for the county back in 2022 as part of your official plan update at that time. And I've been asked by Matt to speak for about 20 minutes today about the update to that work. And I do apologize. I have developed very swiftly a bad cold that is sort of getting in the way of. So if I sound hoarse, that's why. And I do. Yes, I did. Yes. Thank you. So I think if we can go to the next slide, please. So you may remember then that our report was issued in November of 2022. As I say, it was a growth forecast piece, and it also looked at land needs for both community areas, that is the areas that are focused around housing, and associated lands that are required for residential neighborhoods. And then there was a land needs assessment done for employment areas, which are the areas that are sort of designated specifically for employment activity, mainly sort of manufacturing and industrial uses. And as Matt said, over the last few years, we've provided analysis to staff on the potential impact on these forecasts of some key developments that have taken place. Certainly the plan by Volkswagen to construct a major electric vehicle plant on what is a 1,500-acre site in St. Thomas, which is projected to create between 2,000 and 3,000 on-site jobs, thousands of additional spin-offs, and which, as you know, led to a municipal boundary adjustment in 2023, which transferred land from the municipality of Central Elgin to the city of St. Thomas. Second is the proposed expansion of the Norman Lindale settlement area just here by about 270 acres, and its potential redevelopment for a range of residential or mixed uses. And the third is the coming into force of the new provincial planning statement on October the 20th, 2024, which is a statement of this government's policy with respect to planning, sets a new policy framework for growth management in the county. And among its many provisions is one that the county now base its population and employment forecasting on Ministry of Finance population projections. And these projections, at least the latest version of them, project higher population for the county than the 2022 Hempson report. So I want to sort of discuss why that's the case, compare the two, and discuss how you might plan for this moving forward. And I believe a copy of the memorandum that we've drafted for you is part of your agenda package. Next slide, please. So just want to speak a little bit about these Ministry of Finance population projections. The last version came out in the fall of 2024. The aim is for the Ministry of Finance to be doing these on an annual basis. They haven't done it on an annual basis to date, but I imagine given their newfound prominence, they'll be done annually from now on. So these are projections of the entire Elgin Census Division. So they're population projections that include the county and the city, and they're projections only of population. So there's still a certain amount of translation that the county is required to do to split growth between the city and the county, to allocate the growth to the local municipalities here in Elgin, and to do employment forecasting and associated employment land needs analysis. So for this particular update, we did not shy too far away from the allocations between the city and the county that we assumed back in 2022. That is to say, to the extent that there's higher population growth, it has been distributed proportionately between the city and county moving forward for this update. The allocations that have been made to the area municipalities through this update haven't, again, strayed too much from the allocations that we used in 2022, but we did look closely at recent growth trends in the county, and so some of the allocations are slightly different. So to the extent, for example, that Central Elgin has been shouldering, a very high proportion of the rapid growth that's occurred in the last few years, then Central Elgin's share of growth moving forward has been updated accordingly. And you'll see that in the revised forecasts. And then to the extent that there's additional growth that is anticipated on employment lands, we have allocated that growth to areas of the county where there's existing vacant employment area. And that's mainly in the township of Southwold. We did not, through this update, have a comprehensive look at the vacant land supply across the county. That's a fair amount of work, and so we didn't get into that particular exercise. I can't imagine that that's changed too much, to be honest, in the last couple of years, so I don't think that has a bearing on the results you're going to see. Next slide, please. So this graph here is just comparing the population growth that was in the 2022 Hempson report with the Ministry of Finance forecasts that came out in the fall. Anything for the county is extrapolated. But if you look at the gold line and the silver line, that's showing you the county forecast and the Census Division forecast for population back in 2022. And the red line and the green line shows you the population forecast for the county and the Census Division, based on the Ministry of Finance projections. And you can see that the projections for the Census Division as a whole show about 8,000 more people in 2051 than what we anticipated back in 2022. Next slide, please. I want to just take a minute or two and speak about what drives growth in Elgin County. And also wanted to talk a little bit about the methodology behind the Ministry of Finance forecasts. What the Ministry of Finance does is it looks at current demographic trends in the county, principally fertility patterns, mortality patterns, and migration patterns, establishes those on the ground in their current context and projects them out 30 years. It's not a forecast in that respect. It's a projection of what is currently going on, pushed out over the long term in the future, into the future. And you can see from this chart here, the growth in Elgin is really driven by migration, mainly the movement of people from London, the London Central Metropolitan Area, St. Thomas, and a bit further afield in many respects, to places like Central Elgin and the other urban areas of the county, Aylmer, Malahide, Bayham. A lot of the time, people searching for more affordable housing, a more rural existence, all the great things that the county has to offer, of course. To a lesser extent, it's driven by broader migration patterns, higher immigration that's occurred in the last few years, higher rates of temporary foreign workers arriving to this country and southwestern Ontario in particular, and higher rates of international students, particularly in areas where there are opportunities for tertiary education. These are minor components of growth in Elgin County, of course. And you can see, if you look at the gold line there, that's the migration component of growth in the county, in the census division, I should say. And you can see that the rapid increase in migration since 2016 has really driven the recent population growth surge. By the way, this is a pattern you'd see in many, many places across southern Ontario, particularly at the fringe of, the Greater Golden Horseshoe and the region of Waterloo and large sort of metropolitan areas. And you can see in the red dotted line, that is what the Ministry of Finance projects the level of migration to be for its recent projections. So it's a very high rate continuing moving forward right the way through to 2051, based on the current high rate of migration to the county and the city. And then finally, of course, if we look at the other key component of growth, which is natural increase, which is the number of births was the number of deaths, that's a very minor component of growth here in the county, and that's the green line you see here, which is just reaching an inflection point. That is to say, we're reaching a point where the number of deaths actually is going to exceed the number of births moving forward, and the Ministry of Finance forecasts negative natural increase over the long term moving forward. Next slide, please. Sorry.
Yeah, if you got a question, go ahead.
Stefan, can you explain what explains the out migration from roughly 21, 22 forward? See, you mentioned 2016 forward, there was in migration. What's going on with the people moving back out of the region? What can you explain that? Is there something that points to that?
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Chair. So it's difficult to say, obviously, because we're still in that right now. It's quite possible that there's been a lot of changes to federal immigration policies in the last 18 months. And not just immigration policies, but policies geared towards capping international student enrollment and capping the ability of employers to take on temporary foreign workers. So to the extent that that plays a role in attracting migrants to the county, those caps may have come into play in the last 18 months. The cap changes to federal immigration policy have not yet taken hold, but they will very soon. So I don't think that explains the recent dip. But it could also be that, when we were doing this back in 2022, there was a lot of housing construction going on in central Elgin in particular, because that was a place where people could buy more affordable homes outside the City of London and the City of St. Thomas. And it may be that that affordability gap is not there anymore. I'm speculating here because I haven't looked at this. But housing affordability has slowed growth across the board, across Southern Ontario. So I would imagine that that has had an impact here in Elgin County. And if the differential between the price of homes has narrowed, then I would expect to see perhaps some of the reasons for slower growth here, perhaps due to that.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that. Not having had figured in the temporary foreign workers as part of the migrant, the count for migration coming in. And then, as you say, the recent changes to foreign students. I'm not sure I buy the model. I do, in the last 6 months, there has been a bit of a leveling off, as you say, from a real estate perspective in our area, although growth is progressing across Elgin. But the populations are decreasing. I think what you're finding is more migration in of retirees, as you say, out of the urban environment. And a lot of the families are growing up and moving on. We found that in the end of the county I'm from the last census period, and that's what that indication is. So I was just curious to see what your insights were. What was causing the out-migration? It can't be a depletion of jobs because we haven't had them to begin with. So is it attrition? What is it? That's what I was after.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chairman, and we'd be happy to look into it in a little more detail. I can probably provide you a fuller answer by looking at, the detailed migration data that the census spits out. I should say that this model is not our model. This is the Ministry of Finance projection. So I don't want to speak for them about what they're tracking moving forward, but just so that you know. So yes, I wanted to speak a little bit about how to use these projections moving forward. I've mentioned a little bit about, their limitations in terms of their geographic scope, and of course they're only looking at population, and that they are based on a continuation of current demographic trends. So they are going to what came out in the fall of 2024 is going to pick up changes to international student enrollment, restrictions on temporary foreign workers. But those projections will not have picked up changes to lower the national immigration targets for the next 3 years. Those won't come into play until this year and in the subsequent 2 or 3 years of those projections. Nor do the Ministry of Finance projections account for the impact of the Volkswagen plant, because they're not forecasts. They're not looking at what might take place in the future. They're only looking at what's currently occurring and projecting things forward. So they're not picking up the impact of the EV plant. They do, in fact, when we look at the rate of immigration that was incorporated in our report in 2022, that's far more in line with what is coming than what is shown in the Ministry of Finance forecasts for last October. So if there's one thing we can be sure about the projections moving forward is that they're going to be lower this year and in the coming years than they are right now. And so I did want to sort of put that note of caution in there. The projections are very useful. They serve a very important purpose, but they are variable. And they are easily swayed by changes to federal policies when it comes to temporary foreign workers, student enrollments, and immigration targets. So they do need to be understood in that context. And it would not be a good idea, in my view, for regional governments, county governments, to start adjusting forecasts on an annual basis just to reflect these changes that are occurring in the projections, because they are quite variable for that reason. And they do not pick up local developments that might be occurring, like the VW plant. Next slide, please. So this is just comparing the population allocations between the 2022 report and the new allocations that are based on the finance forecasts. More growth across the board, across the county. Most of the new growth in central Elgin and the major settlement areas, that as I mentioned, and the highest rate of growth occurring in central Elgin itself, which, as we've seen, has been shouldering much of the population growth in recent years.
Stefan, could I step in? So how is this based? Is it based on services provided? How did they come up with these numbers? Because there seems to be quite a discrepancy in whether the actual municipality has services or not. And just, it's good, it's a little confusing because Southwold, the growth of 350, when we have a new wastewater plant, they'll be coming online in Southwold and Fengal and Shed, and that will supply up to 1,400 homes. And an expansion of the Talville plant as well coming online. That seems quite low. And you look at Central Elgin, which is massive, but can their facilities hold that as well? Because you're looking at environmental assessments and all that, and it just seems a little confusing.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just, this is based on historical demand for housing. It does not assume that servicing capacity in and of itself at some point in the future triggers an explosion of demand in a particular location. So where we see demand, as long as we recognize that demand and can, explain it for what it is, and Central Elgin's demand is relatively explainable because of its location, proximity, and all the rest of it to the major cities and connections to the London CMA, then we have continued that demand moving forward. If Central Elgin runs into a servicing constraint, we don't necessarily see that as a barrier for forecasting growth for the area, because that is simply a barrier that the county or the local municipality will have to deal with in the fullness of time to accommodate that demand. But the demand will still be there. Obviously, if you don't provide the capacity, the demand will shift. It may shift to the city, it may shift outside the county, or it may be accommodated in some other place in the county, but we've not assumed that that will take place. Next slide, please. It's a similar story for the households and the housing growth, higher growth across the county, but most of the growth in the major settlement areas and in Central Elgin. So about 2,000 additional homes over and above what was forecast in 2022, which already was quite substantially higher growth than what had taken place in the county prior to that. Next slide, please. We've also looked at the land needs requirements. So the community area land needs, of course, is looking at the land for the new homes, but also all of the other associated lands that you need in a residential neighborhood. So, land for local institutions, schools, local retail, parks, and that sort of thing. And so we've included land associated with those needs in the calculations. We have looked at changing patterns at the local level for the ratio of parkland to housing in the various municipalities. So we have made some adjustments to reflect what's happening on the ground. By and large, we've assumed the same kind of housing density that we assumed back in 2022. So even though there's more homes, they'd still look and feel like the same kind of neighborhoods that we were anticipating in 2022. You're not suddenly going to be building mid-rise apartments with all the extra homes. Where we have additional census data on things like undercoverage rates, we've incorporated that into the analysis. So undercoverage is people who are missed by the census. We have the rates now from the 2021 census. We didn't in 2022. So we've been able to use this additional data where it's available. We have not messed around too much with the mix of housing that's anticipated. Again, because we don't really have good data on that. But we have been able to make some adjustments a little bit about the land that might be required for community area jobs. And we've, made, these are all minor adjustments, but just wanted to let you know that we have looked at all these assumptions in the update. Next slide, please. So when we look at the updated community area land needs, the story really is that all municipalities in the county, with some exceptions, have sufficient land for community area lands to 2051. The exception in 2022 was Aylmer, where we identified a 20-hectare deficit in community area lands, and that has now increased to 36 hectares. And we now have, where we did not in 2022, we now are showing a deficit of land in central Elgin of around 20 hectares. Next slide, please.
Of course, that precludes the site across the street. Okay.
Certainly, to the extent that there's a deficit of 20 hectares. Sorry, Councillor. Mr. Chairman, so to the extent that there's a 20-hectare deficit, certainly the proposed expansion to Norman Lindale would be more than sufficient to deal with that deficit. Yeah. Part of the assumption here too was that higher population growth in and of itself will translate into higher employment growth. And of course, with the key developments at VW and some of the spin-offs arising from the plant, then there will be additional employment growth in the county. And we have assumed that to the extent that that additional employment growth takes place, it will take place on lands that are already designated and vacant for those kinds of uses. And the vast majority of that land is in Southwold. So we've allocated that additional growth to Southwold. And even with that additional growth, Southwold still has a surplus of about 30 or more hectares in 2051. So there's more than enough employment land to deal with the additional growth arising from the additional employment growth. Just a couple of things about this, because it's very tricky to get this right. There's a lot of claims out there about the spin-off jobs that are going to arise from VW. So we may well be accused of being rather conservative about this, but wanted to just sort of lay out our thinking here. The first is that although there would be a lot of spin-offs from VW, they will be very broadly distributed. The supply chain for this particular plant is massive, spread right across the province and internationally. And so we can't assume, I think, that all of those spin-offs will occur locally. But the second thing is that we all already anticipated in the 2022 report that Elgin was very well situated to accommodate these kinds of jobs. Of course, we didn't anticipate VW, but we anticipated this kind of thing happening. Maybe not as quickly or in sort of one fell swoop, but over the 30-year period, there was a lot of employment land area jobs that we forecasted because we took account of the location of the county, and all the good things that employment land offers. And we populated it with those kinds of jobs. So we think picked up a lot of the spin-offs that are associated with the plant. We've added a little bit more, but it's not hugely significantly higher. Next slide, please. So just to summarize then, obviously the forecast update that we've prepared for you includes higher population, households, housing, and employment growth. The forecasts are a test, and they're a test based on the Ministry of Finance projections that were released a few months ago. Those projections do not yet incorporate federal policies that have been announced to lower national immigration targets. And so it's likely, highly likely, I would say, that future Ministry of Finance projections for Elgin County will be lower moving forward than they are currently. Therefore, in my view, there's no need to dramatically alter plans for community area planning in the county. Certainly, Aylmer, we think, still requires additional community area lands, quite possibly more than anticipated in 2022. And we think that Central Elgin might need additional community area lands where we didn't anticipate that back in 2022. And there's no need for immediate employment area expansion. Most of the additional employment that's been, that we forecasted can be accommodated on existing vacant lands that exist in Elgin. So happy to answer any more questions you might have. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefan. Any further questions? Go ahead, Ed.
Going to ask for a little witchcraft and forecasting here, which is probably up your bailiwick anyway. Do you suppose that we have already experienced the trickle-down effect of not current, but slightly previous immigration targets? We're still experiencing housing growth and housing demand. So that's what I'm asking. Although there may be some clamp down on future immigration coming in, but have all those impacts trickled down into our area? Have we experienced that yet? I don't think we have. I don't think the end of it's here yet. Am I wrong?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that's a tricky question. But you asked for witchcraft, so I'll give it to you. So immigrants who arrive to Ontario don't land in droves in Elgin County. They go to the GTA. They go to the City of Toronto, the Region of Peel, City of Ottawa, Region of York, for the most part. The reason why it matters here is because there is a push effect outside of the GTA that sort of spills over into the hinterland, the outer ring of the Greater Golden Horseshoe, and then beyond into Elgin County and Oxford County and so on and so forth. So I suspect you're correct to say that there's a bit of a lag between immigrant arrivals in the GTA and that sort of push effect into these broader regions, particularly when it comes to sort of housing demand and housing needs. So I think you're correct that there may be a bit of a lag. And there may well be a lag then as a result in terms of how long it takes for the lower immigration rates to sort of trickle down to this area as well.
Continuing the conversation, then I would assume that there's a displacement factor taking place. If the immigrants are coming principally to the GTA, would some of the, I guess you could say, and I think this is what's happening, is that the retiring population within the GTAs are migrating out. And perhaps that's what we're experiencing in Elgin. The Port Burwells, the Port Stanleys, you know what I'm getting at. Everyone wants to live along the lake in their golden years.
The other thing, as you rightly point out, is that it's not like immigrants arrive in the GTA and then immigrants get pushed out. It's a whole swath of age groups and that get pushed out, and they don't all go to the same place in Ontario. And so Elgin County, as you as you rightly point out, is a very attractive place for retirees because it's still close enough to major urban centers, but it has all the wonderful sort of, affordable housing, wonderful location near the lake, attractiveness of retirees. And we see a similar kind of pattern up in Grey County and along sort of Lake Huron shoreline. So for that. But there are one or two features of this part of the world that make it quite unlike what's going on in Grey County and northern Simcoe County. And one of them is the manufacturing base and traditional manufacturing heartland of southwestern Ontario, which, a lot of people had written off after 2009, and of course is a little bit uncertain right now as to how it's going to play itself out. But we've certainly seen, a renewed interest in redeveloping this area for what it has been for, many, many decades. So I think that is, I think that is much more closely tied to immigration policy than the first pattern of migration that we're talking about, which is that sort of pushing out from the GTA. That's far more direct and will be far more directly influenced by things like federal immigration policies.
Anything further for Stefan, sorry. If not, thank you, Steve. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you for having me.
Matt, do you have anything further, or is that the end of your presentation?
No, through the warden, I think that the Stefan's presentation sums it up very well. We're going to be experiencing some growth. There's going to be some fluctuations in the numbers in the future. I think where our official plan currently is it has been adopted. It is with the province for review and approval. The province is in their caretaker sort of stance right now, which means there's not a lot being reviewed, not a lot going on there until the election's over. We have an opportunity to take the study and update our official plan with these new numbers, and then that will hopefully get us to the next time we have to put together or review and update that official plan. So that's the direction staff are looking for today. I think there's some amended wording just being added to the report, and I'll turn it over to Catherine if there's no questions.
Yeah, go ahead, Dominique.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one question I often get, and I realize when I try to answer it, that I'm not sure how, because we talk about sufficient land across the county, but within the county, some areas been in surplus and some areas being in deficit. So the question I often get is, why not transfer some of the deficit from one municipality to the surplus? And yeah, so that's the essence of the question. And I'm often realize, well, I don't know, is it perhaps based on where, like, we're trying to project where people want to live? But yeah, if you could help me answer that.
Absolutely, through the chair to Councillor Giguère. I think it's a great question. Historically, there are other municipalities that would do that transfer. Here in Elgin, it does not seem like that transfer has been done in the past. It's probably been done out of fairness to allow growth to occur in all of the municipalities and not just some of them. That's the approach I would take, is to allow some growth to occur across the county and not just some. So while there's some deficits, we wouldn't propose to scale back those lands. I think we could leave them for the time being, but there is some evidence and some studies that suggest some of those settlements need to expand. So that's what we'll be looking at.
I guess a comment from my own municipality. I can verify that every piece of residential reserve land in Southold is owned by a developer at this point. And to try and take that away from a developer, good luck. It's going to be a heck of a fight. Ed, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, we've practiced land swapping at the local level before, but I've never heard tell of intra-municipal land swapping. That's interesting. And I think, the chairman's correct. It's difficult enough to wrestle that away from people who have an expectation that this may future development and have acquired or attested a value to it. And then to rob that out or forcibly move that along unless there's some inducement to encourage that transaction to take place. That makes sense? It's got a value. It may be intrinsic, but it's still got a value.
Go ahead, Todd.
Through the chair, would it also be driven by infrastructure? Like I know some of the lower tiers around table have challenges with their infrastructure, but then they still have the push for growth. They'd probably like to not see it right now when they need it, but I don't know how you motivate, but I guess infrastructure would be a big one too.
Okay, anything further for Catherine reads the resolution? Doesn't look like it. Go ahead, Catherine.
Resolved that the report titled Updated Growth Forecasts and Land Needs Assessment for the County of Elgin from the Director of Planning and Development dated February 28th, 2025, I think it's supposed to be February 25th, 2025, be received and filed, and that the Growth Planning Steering Committee recommends that County Council approve the updated growth forecasts and land needs assessment for the County of Elgin at an upcoming meeting of County Council.
Have a mover and seconder, please. Todd and it's the
guide.
it's good. Oh, you're on the record now, so. So seconded by Ed. All in favor? Motion carries. Okay, going down to other business, none, correspondence, none, so closed session.
Resolved that we do now proceed into closed meeting session in accordance with the Municipal Act to discuss the following matters under Municipal Act Section 239-2. Closed meeting item number 1, closed meeting minutes, January 24th, 2025, and closed meeting item number 2, Sunset Provincial Lands, under Section H, information explicitly supplied in confidence to the municipality or local board by Canada, a province or territory or crown agency of any of them, and K, a position, plan, procedure, criteria, or instruction to be applied to any negotiations carried on or to be carried on by or on behalf of the municipality or local board.
Mover and seconder, please. Noble and Jiguer. All in favor? Motion carries.
Resolved that we do now rise and report.
Noble and Jiguer. All in favor? Motion carries. And next resolution,
Resolved that the January 24th, 2025 closed meeting minutes be adopted.
mover and seconder, please. Noble and Ketchabah. All in favor? Motion carries.
Closed meeting item number 2, resolved that the verbal update from the Director of Planning and Development be received and filed and that staff proceed as directed.
Mover and seconder, please. Ketchabah and Jiguer. All in favor? Motion carries. And next meeting at the call of the chair, motion to adjourn.
Resolved that we do now adjourn at 1:52 p.m. to meet again at the call of the chair.
Mover and seconder, please. Jiguer and Noble. All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you all.